It's story time.
Hi, and welcome to Storytime. I'm Kimberlyn. Today's story time is a little bit of some self-disclosure in the sense that one of my core principles is truly being as authentic as possible. And in that, yes, my capacity varies from day to day, even from season to season. And the second component of that authenticity is transparency, meaning to not only be authentic, but also to let that authenticity be seen, witnessed, observed, meaning others know who I am as much as I know who I am. So today's story time is, again, an extension of this conversation. And I'm so grateful for those of you who have replied or sent me a note or having a face-to-face conversation this month in response to this ongoing dialogue about what it means to belong, what it means to participate as a citizen, to be included. And so today, as we wrap up kind of this month-long exploration and conversation, I'm really looking at what psychologists call imposter syndrome. Now, again, I'm not a therapist in the sense of psychotherapy. Yoga therapist, we deal with the mind stuff for sure, but mostly from the perspective of how is the mind perceiving and attaching to those things that cause us suffering. So the imposter syndrome is really a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evidence of our success, and particularly almost contrary to what is seen from the outside looking in. And it's kind of it's a conundrum in of itself, because in many ways, a lot of us get caught up in not trusting our inner wisdom. We talked about that last week. And so we look outside ourselves for validation, for affirmation, for approval, right? And we get stuck in that trap of perhaps people pleasing. Well, the imposter syndrome takes that to a whole new level and no longer trusts what the outside world perceives, because we believe we've learned so well how to armor up, how to perform, how to present what they want to see, to the point where they don't see beyond the veil. They can't see what's truly underneath. In other words, I've tricked everyone in the world as to who I am. In which case, what bubbles underneath that veneer, that polished surface of performance and often excellence, is a fear of being found out, a fear of being discovered that I'm a fraud, that I'm a lie, that it's only a matter of time until everyone who thinks they love me discover who I really am and withhold or retract that love and approval. This is, in essence, the imposter syndrome. Now, it doesn't always have to show up that extreme. In fact, Dr. Valerie Young identifies 5 distinct interpretations or ways in which imposter syndrome shows up. She identifies them as the expert, maybe the know-it-all, the one who really knows his or her stuff; the perfectionist, the one who you can count on to get it done right; the natural genius, the one who seems effortless in their ability to do the things, graceful and present; the soloist, the one who gets shit done because they can do it themselves. They don't need to rely on, they don't need to wait for approval or even contribution. They just get it done. The maverick might be another way to think about this individual. And lastly is the superhero. And we can think about that as the caped wonder boy, in the sense that they often come in and fix a problem, rescue a situation as the hero, as the victor saving the victim. So all of that said, I want to share a story, but begin by telling you or sharing with you that this came full face again in my life this weekend as I was scrolling through Netflix, trying to Netflix and chill, and a little bit of occupation so that I could sit still and rest. But a 2005 movie called Rumor Had It made it across my dashboard on Netflix. And I didn't spend a lot of time exploring it. I like Jennifer Aniston and I like Mark Ruffalo. I'm not a super fan of Kevin Costner, but he was in it too, and I could tolerate him. So anyway, Rumor Has It is, as I said, a 2005 film in which basically Jennifer Aniston's character is basically in a bit of a crisis as she doesn't know who she is. And she questions that to the point where she starts to invent perhaps even an explanation of why she doesn't fit in and belong. So much so that she explores the possibility that her dad is not truly her biological dad. And yet, how does she ask these questions without hurting the world around her, the family and the friends who she loves and yet really doesn't feel at sync with? To the point where she finally comes to a conclusion. Ironically enough, she's giving advice to her sister, who's in a bit of a crisis herself, and then recognizes that if she takes that same advice, how much happier she will be. That when she releases this idea of having to know all of the answers, having to have all of her questions answered at all before she enjoys her life, before she's allowed to feel joy and happiness, creates this conundrum of foreboding joy, as Brene Brown said. So one of the examples in my own life where this really came to fruition, really became palpable, was after a bicycle accident that left me bedridden and injured through recovery for over a year. And at the end of that season, when I was given permission from my caretakers, from my doctors, to begin to resume living more fully, I initially reintroduced the same strategies that I had been using prior to my injury, prior to the interruption that caused everything to come to a screeching halt. Why? Because I didn't have an alternative strategy. So I made a list. I abided by that list. I created a schedule, had an agenda, and to do things. And I was able to accomplish. I actually was not only able to accomplish, but I was able to re-earn the status that I had stepped away from, which was performance-based, for my at-home business that I had been successful with prior to the injury. It was only once I reached that platform again that I realized I didn't want to do this anymore. Now, there's a certain amount of credibility that I needed to earn, to re-earn, in order to feel comfortable with the decision of letting it go. Maybe you can relate in the sense that if I said I no longer wanted that position, that higher, it was a position of leadership within this organization, and it was supporting my family. It was financially stable and profitable. And yet the work itself, I felt a bit like an imposter. But that's not where the imposter syndrome fully came in. The imposter syndrome came in when I knew in my gut, in my belly, that I no longer wanted to do this particular kind of work. Yeah, I was good at it. Yeah, I was making a difference, not only for my clients and those that I served, but I was also providing for my family. And I was able to have so many of the things about freedom and independence and autonomy and ability to negotiate. I was doing a lot of things that fit with who I thought I wanted to be. But for about 10 years, I had been advertising that not only did I want to be at this position, I wanted to build my business and be promoted to a national sales director position, which is the top 1% of my company, in which case I was at the top 10%. But in order to get to that next tier that I saw at the 1%, I knew some things were going to have to shift. And I was working to shift those things. But all the while, right, I wasn't sure just how far I had to go to separate who I am authentically from who they were asking me to be. But the crux of it was I didn't actually know who I was authentically until, one, I had the year off from life and had nothing but my own self and my own company because I couldn't read, I couldn't listen to music, I couldn't engage in life in the way that it normally was. In fact, I couldn't even carry on a conversation because my brain was unable to process and hold the thought of that beginning of the sentence by the time you got to the end of the sentence. In other words, I didn't have a lot to contribute. So as I regained that capability and that skill, yes, I was able to put it to work because I still had those muscle memories of the skills that I used before my accident and injury. But something wasn't settling. And that's when I was introduced to yoga. And yoga gave me not only the opportunity to rehabilitate my body, it also gave me the opportunity to kind of meet myself on the mat in the practice and allow for those shifts that are inevitable in life, but to make peace with those shifts. That shift that occurred by way of the practice of asana, pranayama, meditation on my yoga mat is what empowered me to say, again, this is in my own headspace, in my own heart space, I don't want to do this anymore, referring to my existing career. But of course, right at the end of that thought is, well, if not this, then what? Neti, right? Not this, not this. I knew that I wanted to be in service. I knew that I wanted to be working with individuals where I could support and enhance their day-to-day living. I didn't realize at that time that yoga would be the way that I could do that. But the courage to step away from that former career came when I realized that the doorway or the window had opened to consider yoga as the possibility. But the imposter syndrome showed up when I realized that for years I had been saying I wanted this national sales director position. So if I walk away from this career, that's no longer an option. So did that make me a liar? Did that mean that I was living without integrity as I was pursuing that particular expression of who I was in the world? Well, that was the conundrum for me. And especially as I started the story, the primary foundation of who I am in the world is about this alignment of integrity. And so to come face to face with this idea of who I proclaimed myself to be, future national sales director, now I realize that I had been lying for over a decade. And yet my definition of lying includes an awareness of the untruth. And I didn't have an awareness of this being untrue. In fact, for all intents and purposes, it was true. It was what I saw. But that doesn't mean that that's the end, because I didn't even know that yoga was a possibility. And this is one of the reasons why I advocate so fervently for a vision board processes, that building a vision board helps you to see beyond what you know, even if you can't articulate what it is. So even when I look at my vision boards that I created 10 years ago, they are similar in their imagery and their wording. It was just the context, the environment in which I was doing that thing, those actions of doing and non-doing, redoing and undoing, the way in which I was showing up is essentially the same that I do today. I just have now a clearer understanding and a greater alignment with the circle, the community in which I serve. I'm still teaching how to be our best selves. I'm still providing tools on how to breathe, move, and rest, a little bit of a different language in the previous entity. But my point is that it was through the practice of yoga that I really came to be at peace with the new information that I was out of alignment. And if someone had told me that I was out of alignment, I would have rejected and defended against that, probably even bearing down to prove them wrong. as a way of compensating for my own fear of being discovered or found out. In which case, because this came about inside my own skin, inside my own practice space, I was able to nurture it enough to get clear, not just from a logical perspective, but from the emotional perspective. And ultimately aligning that with my gut response, my intuition, to find where I wasn't faking it, I was just shifting it. And as you've heard me say, shift is inevitable, right? That shift is going to happen. Whether or not we embrace the shift, welcome the shift, facilitate the shift, shift is going to happen. So by way of the practice of yoga, I was able to not only prepare for the shift, but I was able to engage, participate fully to my capacity in that shift, in which case, literally in a matter of few days, I think I closed shop in November. And by January, I had launched myself into this new endeavor of being a full-time yoga teacher. January, great time for the fitness industry, right? But sincerely, between January and March, I had built my activity from 0 to as many as 15 classes a week. That later grew up to 26 classes a week because I was clear on my focus and was able to continue to relinquish the fear factor, the burden factor that I had been lying for so many years, because of the work that yoga helped me to receive, to shift, in which case the shame and the guilt that came in other ways earlier in my life wasn't even a part of this transition. And hence I freed myself from the imposter syndrome of that particular issue. That's not to say imposter syndrome still rears its ugly head once in a while in my world. But because of that experience, I can now look imposter syndrome in the eyes, so to speak, and say, oh yeah, maybe, but not today. And come back to that calm, abiding place of truth in my body and with the circle of those whom walk this path with me and help me stay the path, even when my imposter, even when the fears, even when doubt show up to challenge me to abandon the path. Because who am I? Who am I to do this work? Well, who are you to not do this work? When you find even a glimmer of what lights you up, of what helps you to show up and to serve from your abundance, let that lead you to find your life's work. My guess is, given the ratio of who experiences imposter syndrome, it's upwards of 80%. You probably had a similar experience. And so I want to invite you to reflect on that and then consider if it was someone else's story. Would you agree with the imposter syndrome story, or would you challenge that? And start to shift your perspective a bit and see if you can't find a clearer perception, a clearer access to witness to find your way back to living in alignment, to living with truth from a place of compassion. That's what Storytime is about. It's about sharing our stories and being authentically present for one another in these transitions and in these shifts. So I hope that today you can embrace what is real and present for you and show up, even if it's imperfect, even if it's awkward, even if you fail on every level of external judgment. By showing up authentically and willing to continue to explore the boundaries of what you know and what you don't know, you're living vibrantly. And what other goal and objective is worth it than to live vibrantly in authenticity and in community? May you be well today. May you breathe deeply and move freely, labor lovingly, and live vibrantly. Namaste.